Hi, hi everyone. Phil here. It's the third session for your nutrition coaching for the season, and today I'm going to talk about protein and the importance of protein, particularly for muscular recovery and making the most of your training and adaptations to training. So, protein is one of the what we call the macronutrients. So, we have total energy in the diet, and then there's three macronutrients that make up that energy, and that's carbohydrate, protein, and fat. We talked about carbohydrate in the last session, which forms the bulk of the calories you need and the energy you need. But protein is important, less for a source of energy, but more as a to maximize the adaptations to training, so that when you train, your muscle breaks down and you need to rebuild that muscle, and protein is a nutrient, the most important nutrient that goes towards promoting that recovery and rebuilding of the muscle after exercise and after training. So what is protein? So protein is a structure for all cells, including muscle. So all the cells in our body, protein is the structural component of those cells. So your hair, your skin, most of the organs in the body have protein as a structure. But obviously, when we're talking about football and exercise, the most important thing is that protein is the main component of muscle. So when you're exercising, you're using your muscles, you're training your muscles, then you need a source of protein to maximize those training effects and maximize the functional component of muscle, which is the proteins. And animal foods contain protein. So the major source for protein within the diet is animal foods. So meat, dairy, cheese, fish, all those types of foods contain high amounts of protein, but also contain high quality protein, which is what you want to fully maximize the sort of training potential and the nutritional source that helps you to make the most of your training. So milk, eggs, cheese, meat are the main sources. You can use, other foods do have protein, as a lot of non-dairy foods. So non-dairy milk, soya milk has protein, and a lot of the sort of replacement meat products have protein, beans, pulses, those sort of things. So you can get protein through non-meat and dairy sources, but it is a bit more difficult to meet your overall requirements if you're not eating meat and dairy. And generally, what we find in sports nutrition is if you get enough calories, which we talked about in the first session, then and you're a meat eater and you eat meat, dairy, and cheese, you tend to be getting enough protein. Protein isn't the problem, particularly if you're getting enough calories. Plant sources have lower quality, so we need to be careful then about the way we mix our protein sources. So a meat source will have everything we need from protein, what we call the amino acids. It's got all of the amino acids, whereas baked beans, for instance, wouldn't have all the amino acids, but if you had beans on toast, then you would be getting them all. So it's just about balancing the right foods together to make sure you're getting the full quality you need if you're not eating animal-based sources. So beans, legumes, nuts, soya, they're all good sources of protein that are not from animal sources. And just like carbohydrate, we get 4 calories per gram. So when we're thinking about that first session and about how we get where we get our calories from, and obviously we want to get most of our calories from carbohydrate, but protein will be contributing to the calories, but in at 4 kilocalories per gram, so at similar quantity to the amount that you get from carbohydrate. When we talk about fat, there's much higher calorie density in fat than there is in protein or carbohydrate. So why do we need protein? What is its function? Well, it regenerates muscle. That's the important message, and we'll talk in a bit about when you need to eat protein. So because it's regenerating muscle and 40% of the protein in the body is in your muscles, then that's what we're using it for. We need protein to help regenerate the muscle, because the muscle goes through a process of breaking down and rebuilding, and therefore we need protein to help rebuild that muscle after we've played and after we've trained, to make sure that we're getting the best from that and that we're recovering properly. So it is about regeneration and recovery. So the building blocks for muscular repair and regeneration, that's what we're talking about when we're talking about why we need protein and adequate amounts of protein in the diet. So it then optimizes the training effect. It makes sure you're making the most out of the training that you've been undertaking, particularly hard sessions, and that the effect and response to that training is optimized. So we need protein. So how much do we need compared to carbohydrates? So the recommendations for the general population, and I'll talk about what these figures means in real terms food, is 0.8 grams per kilogram. So for a 68 kilo player, 48 grams of protein during the day. But if you're playing football, the recommendations from various sources, but UEFA we'll look at again in a minute, is the 1.6 to 2.2 grams per kilogram. So double the amount of protein, because of the way that we're using our muscles much more than the general population would be, so that the breakdown and recovery is greater, and therefore you need a greater source. So there is some argument about what's optimum, but if we're talking about 2 grams per kilogram, so 60 kilo player, 120 grams potentially of protein during the day. Actual intakes, so from the studies I did with you guys last season, and a lot of the studies in the literature, is it's slightly less than that. Not vastly less, obviously higher than the general population. So again, like I said earlier, it tends to be, if we can increase the calories, make sure the calories are optimum, we're probably going to increase that protein intake. And then what we need to talk about is then about timing. So if it's not enough energy, not enough protein, if we can get the energy right, we can get that protein figure up to where it needs to be at this 1.6 to 2.2 grams per kilogram. Vegetarians, as I said before, may need more, because the quality of the protein is not quite as optimal for the muscle particularly than animal-based sources, so that may need to be tweaked up a bit if we're getting all our protein from non-animal sources. But what does that mean in terms of food? Like I said in my introductory talks, what we're trying to do is say, what do you need to eat? What does that mean in food terms? So UEFA give us these figures, so you can see 3.3 to 8, which we talked about for carbohydrate, so about half as much for protein, slightly less than half. And the main source is dairy, mainly animal source proteins. Plant-based can also be used, and like I say in this picture, you can see that it's the building block. So what we focus in on is getting the right carbohydrate, getting the right amount of protein to rebuild, and then the balance of calories from fat. We do need calories from fat because they do form other functions, and they do act as carriers particularly for some vitamins and minerals. But this is what we're going to focus on. But there's two things here. It's the amount of protein, and then the amount of protein per meal, which again is quite important. So for the best recovery, the best outcomes is that we have 20 grams of protein per meal or every 3 hours, and then we can have a higher amount of protein before sleep because we've got that longer period where we're resting and recovering, and it's been shown that we can actually utilize much higher amounts of protein during that recovery and sleeping period. So the idea is that we take a protein source before bed, particularly on those days where you've played hard or you've trained hard. It's a good habit to get into, to have a sort of pre-sleep drink or some food that can help with that recovery and rebuilding process. So it's even amounts throughout the day and then a certain amount before sleep. So if we're looking at that 20 grams of protein, which is what the recommendations are per meal, per sort of portion, you're talking about a pint of milk, slightly more if it was soya milk, 3 eggs, good dairy source of protein, and then the meat sources, so 100 gram salmon steak, an 80 gram chicken breast, so a sort of relatively medium-sized chicken breast, or a small beef steak. They would all give you 20 grams of protein. So if you think about each of your meals, when we looked at that food plate at the beginning, you've got the 2/3 carbohydrate, and then you've got this portion that you need to have within that, a bit like this plate showing here. You've got carbohydrates, you've got fruit and vegetables in there, that you also need to have some sort of protein around that 20 grams with each meal. So if that was throughout the day, milk could be with breakfast, could be that end of day drink would give you the 20 grams of protein. You could use yuzu and those sort of things as well, milkshakes. I've given you some recipes during these sessions for smoothies and those sort of things. You can incorporate that where you're getting a good source of protein, and then your different meals, making sure you're having something there that's giving you protein. And like I say, particularly when you're in that recovery period, so the meal when you get home from training is quite an important one. Cottage cheese is another good source of protein, but obviously a higher quantity. So that's what you need in the sort of portions, but then we're also talking about timing. So portion is important, timing is important, and having those evenly spread throughout the day. So every 3 to 4 hours having something. So planning, so you say, well, I'm going to have my 3 meals a day, I need to plan for those, but I also need to plan in my snacks that maybe I need a protein source, whether that's a sandwich or boiled eggs or cottage cheese, something to say, right, okay, there's another portion of protein throughout the day, or it may be that end of day evening drink or snack that gives you that bit more and that bit extra, because it's that post-exercise recovery period which is the most important. So the hours after you've trained and the hours after you've played, getting a good source of protein in that period is important to help with that recovery. So meals and snacks evenly spread throughout the day, and there's some research that's shown a lot of players maybe get enough protein, but they have one big meal, say that's dinner when they get home, which is fine, but if 50% of your protein for the day is in that one meal, then you're not going to be able to use it all. You need to have a sort of more even spread, looking at those different portions, mostly carbohydrate, but having a good source of protein throughout the day rather than just one big meal. And then pre-sleep, as I said before, for overnight training adaptation. So particularly on the day, if you've had a really hard session of training and you feel, yeah, I'm going to be sore in the morning, then having that overnight pre-sleep drink, protein source, snack before you go to bed will help with that recovery and rebuilding process. So it's quite a good habit to get into, to have a sort of some sort of supper on those particular days to help with the recovery process. And here we've got a recipe for a protein smoothie, which I'll send over with these slides, with this resource. And this particular one, because the reason I put it in there particularly is this one actually uses a protein powder, so that's something you could potentially think about. You don't necessarily need it, but it does help with increasing the amount of protein if you feel you might be short. So that one, 45 grams of protein. Think about, we said 20 grams of protein in each meal, but that last meal at night is the one where you can have a higher quantity of protein that may help more with the recovery. So if you're the sort of person that doesn't like eating late at night, this protein smoothie could be quite a good addition, particularly on training days where recovery is important. So just a final slide, looking at Alex Morgan, who was on a vegetarian diet but has worked on her nutrition, knew that she needed enough protein and alongside other nutrients to optimize her performance and play. So she added eggs and dairy back into her diet. Obviously, you could have done that in other ways on a vegetarian diet, on a vegan diet, but eggs and dairy are important, and it's important for performance and recovery. That's the end of that session, so I'll see you again next time.